Gonzaga bounced back from the loss against West Virginia by smacking Indiana on Thursday, giving fans something to be thankful for.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Black Friday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time, folks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, Gonzaga did not go the way of the Yukon Huskies, who fell in all three games in the Maui Invitational. Gonzaga bounces back from the loss to West Virginia by beating Indiana, setting up a fifth-place matchup against Davidson, on Friday evening. We're going to recap Gonzaga's win over the Hoosiers. We're going to talk about their upcoming opponent on Friday evening and what they need to do to make sure they finish the battle for Atlantis with a winning record. All right, let's start with the game against Indiana. I know many folks probably weren't able to watch this game. I know the timing for me personally, moving it up from being at 9 a.m. Pacific time to 11:30 kind of threw off my Thanksgiving day. I know that was a struggle for many fans with that game not being at the time most of us expected it to be at. But for those of you who weren't able to watch the game, we'll talk about kind of what we saw in this one. Gonzaga, of course, again, we'll take on Davidson in the fifth place game. Indiana and Providence are facing each other right now as I'm recording this on Friday morning. Indiana is up with about 8 minutes to go. We'll see if they can avoid finishing last in the battle for Atlantis against Providence. The good news for Gonzaga in their 89-73 win over Indiana, it was mostly good from what they did offensively and defensively. A nice change of pace from the struggles we saw from them against West Virginia. It was a balanced scoring attack. Gonzaga had 6 players score between 11 and 16 points in this game. 6 of the 9 players who played were all within 5 points of each other. Khalif Battle led the charge with 16 points. Michael Ajayi and Nolan Hickman each had 15. Graham Ike had 14. Gregg had 13. And Ryan Nembhard had 11. Again, I think trying to game plan against Gonzaga when they have that many different weapons, to have 6 of their 9 players all score in double figures and not have Braden Huff be among them, I think is a really strong testament to this team's depth and the variety of different ways that they are capable of beating you. Nembhard was fantastic in this one, again, as he's been all year long. 11 points, but he also had 13 assists, the only double-double of anybody on this Gonzaga roster. Michael Ajayi was close. He had 9 rebounds, but he did not get that double-double. Nembhard also had 5 steals. He was only 2 of 6 from the field, 1 of 1 from the three-point line, but he was 6 of 7 from the free throw line. We mentioned Michael Ajayi already, one of his better games in a Gonzaga uniform, and I think we really needed to see this. For a lot of players on this Gonzaga team, this hasn't been the best tournament, and obviously it's only been 2 games, but we've seen a few guys who were struggling coming into the tournament who haven't quite turned it around. Obviously, Graham Ike has been the one catching the most attention, but Michael Ajayi was a guy who kind of disappeared in the last couple of games for Gonzaga. So for him to come out in this game against a very good power forward in Malik Renaud, to come out, have 15 points, have 9 rebounds. He was 5 of 9 from the field. He was 5 of 5 from the free throw line. He'd been a little struggling there a little bit earlier in the season. So this was really much needed for Ajayi to come out, have a good game against a quality opponent. And same with Gregg. Gregg and Michael Ajayi came off the bench, played a lot of minutes in this one because of foul trouble for both Graham Ike and Braden Huff. We talked about this potentially being the first game where Michael Ajayi and Gregg play minutes together. That's not something we had seen yet from Gonzaga, and in fact, that was the case. They did play big minutes together, not necessarily not with one of Huff or Ike, which is what we talked about pregame, but in fact, they played together in the front court with both Ike and Huff on the bench in foul trouble. Ben finished this game with 13 points and a pair of assists. He also had a block, and he was 5 of 9 from the field. He also made his first 3 of the season. We've been waiting to see that happen for Big Ben, and he knocked it down in the second half, pushed Gonzaga's lead over 20 with that shot. It was nice to see that from him. Zags also had a 15 rebound advantage in this one. 42-27 was the rebounding advantage for the Zags, and the defense was great. Defense was great in this one. Held Indiana to under 46% from the field. They were 4 of 18 to 22% from three. And really, the only player who did his damage against Gonzaga in this one was Oumar Ballo. I don't think Gonzaga's strategy was let Ballo go to work and stop everybody else necessarily, although I will say that was the strategy for Louisville in the first game against Indiana, and it seemed to work pretty well. I think for Gonzaga, foul trouble really early in this game kind of put them in a position where they couldn't defend Ballo, A, with the size that they wanted to defend him with, and B, they couldn't defend him physically because they already were in foul trouble, so they kind of had to let him go to work. And he did. Shout out to Oumar Ballo. He wanted to have a big game against Gonzaga more than anything. You know that that's true. His team did not win, and I'm sure he'd trade that for a W, but he was phenomenal. 25 points in this one. He was 11 of 13 from the field. Hyper efficient. He was going over his left shoulder with ease. He made some tough shots. This was a really nice performance from Oumar Ballo. But the entire rest of Indiana's team shot less than 35% from the field. The guards were non-existent. Again, they didn't play well against Louisville. They didn't play well against Gonzaga either. This was a big area of concern for Indiana and a testament to Gonzaga's perimeter defense and their ability to keep Indiana from being able to get easy looks outside of some easy looks for Ballo early in this one. It was a tough game offensively for the Hoosiers. Also, Gonzaga, 21 of 22 from the free throw line, 95.5%. They have been not just good at the free throw line this year, but elite. Absolutely elite shooting from the charity stripe for Gonzaga. Khalif Battle made all of his. Ryan Nembhard was the only player who missed one. He was 6 of 7. Can't really complain there. Again, Ajayi 5 of 5. Was really good to see Gonzaga's entire team shoot well from the free throw line. If that continues, that's going to make them a really tough out, especially in close games as the season goes on. Some of the not so good stuff we saw in this game. I rarely lean into this directly, but I'm going to say it. Officiating. It was bad. It was not good in this game. It wasn't really very good in the West Virginia game. Stephen Carr, the great Stephen Carr, the former host of Locked On Zags, who now works at Gonzaga, had a thread on Blue Sky. He may have posted it on X as well, but I saw it on Blue Sky, talking about the officiating crews that we saw in these two tournaments and just saying their experience level. Most of them are very, very raw, have done very little college basketball. A lot of them are former NBA refs who are doing their first weekend of college basketball games, their like 6th or 7th career game. Just an inexperienced crew who hadn't worked together very much, who hadn't called a lot of college basketball games. And it showed. Indiana was in the bonus 7 minutes into this game. The final 13 minutes of the first half, Indiana was in the bonus. That's crazy. Graham Ike picked up a foul 3 minutes in on Oumar Ballo, which was a legitimate foul. And then he got called in a double technical situation that, based on what we saw, looked pretty questionable. Ike was boxing out. The free throw left Oumar Ballo's hand. Ike leaned into Mackenzie Mbako, and it was a hard box out, but it didn't look flagrant. He didn't elbow him in the face. He just got into him pretty hard. Mbako took his elbow and threw it into the back of Graham Ike's head, and they decided to call that double technicals. Seemed a little suspicious, I would say, in that situation. I don't think it was like malicious necessarily, just not very good officiating, especially after looking at the replay and still assessing that as a double tech. Regardless, it meant Ike had to go to the bench very early in this game, which is a problem for this team going forward. And it's not just, the officiating wasn't great in this game, but he's got to not be in early foul trouble the way that he almost always is. And then Braden Huff picked up 2 quick fouls. Gonzaga's 2 starting bigs, Huff and Ike, each had 2 fouls with 12 minutes to go in the first half. They managed to make it work. Again, Ajayi and Gregg played together a lot, but the foul troubles, the officiating in general was just not good in either of these first 2 games in Atlantis. Also, Dusty Stromer, he's having a bit of a rough time. He didn't play well against West Virginia. He didn't play well here against Indiana. One of the few players for Gonzaga who didn't really play all that well. Didn't score any points. He had 3 rebounds, a turnover, and 3 fouls in 11 minutes, was struggling on the defensive end, was a step slow at times, committed some stupid fouls, just things that a bit, I don't want to say regression because that seems too dramatic, but just some freshman mistakes from a guy who wasn't making freshman mistakes at the end of last year or the start of this year. But he's still a young player. I'm not overly concerned about it going forward. However, I will say, and we'll talk about it to close out the show, would be nice to see him end his time in Atlantis on a strong note. Gonzaga was also 6 of 20 from 3, 30% in the game, which is not great either. We're going to talk more about that because it was one of our keys to the game. And we want to talk about how Gonzaga did at executing the keys coming into this game. We're going to discuss Khalif Battle's performance. We're going to talk more about the team's defense, all that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. College hoops is here, and there is nothing better than the atmosphere of a college basketball game. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, Zombie Nation blasting through the speakers, and more. Game Time also has a new feature called Game Time Picks that helps make getting tickets to see your favorite team play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. And it's not just for college basketball. Concerts, theater, stand-up shows, and more as well. And whether it's Game Time's ticketing coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Game Time has you covered. And right now you can still get 2 tickets to see Gonzaga host Kentucky at the Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle on December 7th for $64 a piece. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still recapping Gonzaga's win over the 14th-ranked Indiana Hoosiers. Obviously, that will change by the time we get to Monday, especially if they do not win this game against Providence. I'll give you an update at the end of the show if that game is over. There's still 6 minutes left as I'm recording right now. We're going to talk about the 5 keys we had laid out going into Gonzaga's game against Indiana, how they ended up playing out on the floor Thanksgiving Day. Key 1 was shoot well from deep, and this is not an area that Gonzaga really succeeded. They were 3 of 10 from 3 in the first half. They were 3 of 10 from 3 in the second half. Finished this game 6 of 20 overall, 30% from beyond the arc. Nolan Hickman was 3 of 5. The rest of the team was 3 of 15. He did his job. Pretty much nobody else did. Ryan Nembhard was 1 of 1. So the rest of the team after that, 2 of 14. Ben Gregg and Braden Huff had the 2 other makes. They were each 1 of 3 from 3. Khalif Battle, 0 of 6. Took some good shots. Some of them were maybe a little rushed. He has a tendency to take some heat check threes. You get the good with the bad with Khalif Battle. He did mostly good things in this game. But yeah, the 3-point shooting is not an area of consistency for Khalif. I was going to say at this point in the season, but frankly, it hasn't been for his entire career. So I wouldn't imagine he's suddenly going to become a super consistent 3-point shooter, although I think he will ultimately finish the season with a decent percentage from beyond the arc. I will say Gonzaga did do what we wanted to see them do in this game, which was pull the bigs away from the rim. They did it with Braden Huff. They didn't do it with Graham Ike. That's totally what I would have expected based on their 3-point shooting capabilities. We saw a lot of pick and pop actions with Huff. The 3 that he knocked down did force Oumar Ballo to start coming out away from the rim, which was good for Gonzaga. It allowed Khalif Battle some driving lanes. It did exactly what we wanted it to do. So while Huff and Gregg didn't shoot it super well in this game from beyond the arc, the fact that they can space the floor that way is working for Gonzaga offensively in terms of pulling those bigs away from the rim. Key number 2 is to force Indiana to take tough shots. And this one's kind of tough to gauge because Oumar Ballo got a lot of easy looks. We said it in the onset, 11 of 13 from the field for Ballo in this game. The whole rest of the team shot under 35%. And some of Ballo's shots were not easy. Some of them I would say, okay, there's not anything more Graham could do to defend that, or Braden could do to defend that, or Michael or Ben or whoever was guarding him, especially late in the first half when Graham Ike is defending him with 2 fouls. It's like, okay, if you get your hand up and you make it difficult for him to shoot it and he still scores, you cannot do anything else because you cannot pick up a 3rd foul in that situation. So Ballo having a really good, efficient night, getting some open looks around the rim, that wasn't great. But the rest of Gonzaga's defense was pretty good. But also part of it was just Indiana. This team has no semblance of a consistent offense. They don't run actions to get open looks for their players like Mackenzie Mbako, who could be a lottery pick talent offensively, but he's just not going to look like that in this system. They don't get him in isolation situations. They didn't get him posting. He had Nolan Hickman on him and they weren't posting him up. Malik Renault, he picked up some early fouls, but he's a guy who's got all Big Ten attention and he didn't look that good at all in this game. Like, some of it was Gonzaga's defense. I don't want to pretend that, Gonzaga played bad defense all game. No, that's not true. Indiana shooting 35% by everybody not named Oumar Ballo is absolutely a product of Gonzaga's defense, but it would be remiss to not acknowledge that it is also a product of Indiana's ineffective, inefficient, inconsistent offensive sets that they run under Coach Woodson. Key number 3 for Gonzaga was to take care of the basketball. And honestly, no, this wasn't really a great area of strength for the Zags either. They had 13 turnovers. That's more than usual. In a game where they scored 90 points, or almost 90 points, in a game where they were up 20 for most of the second half, you can't find a whole lot to nitpick and complain about. But they had more turnovers than they should have had. A lot of them were unforced. Trying to get too cute. A lot of, one of the things we love about Ryan Nembhard is his ability to get into the paint and still find ways to make really short, crowded passes in the front court or to the front court players. And he struggled with that. A couple ugly turnovers, just trying to force passes that weren't there, some lazy passes that got stolen, just some stuff that Gonzaga needs to clean up. 13 turnovers is too high for Gonzaga against most good teams. It worked in this game because a lot of Indiana's struggles because of the rebounding advantage, various other things, but Ryan Nembhard had 5 turnovers. He had a great game otherwise. A double-double with 6 steals is fantastic, but 5 turnovers is pretty uncharacteristic for him. Not overly concerned about it. The assist-to-turnover ratio was always going to come down to earth at some point, and to still have 13 assists in a game, I mean, that's an incredible amount. So I'm not worried about 5 turnovers. I'm really not. If it becomes a concern, if it becomes a trend, it'll become a concern, but I'd be pretty surprised if that happened. Michael Ajayi had 3 turnovers. That's been an area of concern for him as well, just making some bad passes. You can tell he's still finding everything out about this offense. That's the best way to put it. It's not like he's behind or anything. He's just sometimes making passes that aren't there, sometimes trying to rush things. Once he's a little bit more comfortable in this offense, I think he'll really thrive in the latter half of the season. Key number 4 was to let Khalif battle Cook. And in the first half, absolutely that was the case. He had 16 points total in this game. 14 of them came in the first half. 11 of them came in the first 14 minutes of this game. Khalif battle got Gonzaga going. He had an alley-oop dunk. He had multiple and one opportunities. The broadcaster, Debbie Antonelli, was just raving over Khalif Battle's ability to go to his right, which he is a phenomenal straight line driver going to his right side. He doesn't do as well going to his left, but when he got an ability to get the ball on the deck, going to his right hand, he finished those and one shots consistently, smoothly. It was really, really pretty to watch. 5 of 9 on 2-pointers for Battle in this game, 6 of 6 from the free throw line. He has yet to miss a free throw this season, but Battle was 0 of 6 from beyond the arc. Again, you take the good with the bad with Khalif Battle. He's got a ton of energy. He's a good perimeter defensive player. He is phenomenal at getting to the free throw line and converting from the free throw line, but he is an inconsistent three-point shooter. He is also he's a very intense guy, and he can get himself in foul trouble and make some mistakes in the defensive end. Again, you take the good with the bad. I would much rather have Khalif Battle on my team than on the other side, but we saw kind of the best and the worst of Khalif Battle just in the first half of this game alone against Indiana. Key number 5 for the Zags was to refocus, not let a loss in the first round game of the Battle for Atlantis kind of spiral the team the way that it did for the UConn Huskies in the Maui Invitational, as they lose a devastating, heartbreaking overtime game to Memphis, turn around and lose a 1-point game to Colorado, and then in the 7th, 8th place game, they get smoked by Dayton, lose by 18 points because they were just deflated from 2 losses. Sean Farnham said it on the broadcast. He said, "You do not want to play Gonzaga after they've lost. This team's history indicates that they will play extremely well following a loss." And that was the case in this game. Mark Few always has this team ready to go when they're bouncing back from a loss. I wasn't super concerned about it. I thought Indiana had some things they could have exploited in some matchups, but they weren't able to do that, whether it's coaching, talent, etc. Who knows? But Gonzaga also came into this game. Again, they got into an 8-0 start. When Indiana punched back, then they went on a big run late in the first half, coasted from there. This team was focused and ready to roll, and that's what led to them getting a victory and now playing in the 5th place game, which is what I want to talk about to close out the show. The Zags are taking on Davidson, not Providence. They're taking on Davidson in the 5th place game. For those concerned who think it's a negative for Gonzaga to be playing Davidson instead of Providence, I think this might be the better of the 2 teams they could have faced. We're going to break it down coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, let's get ready to tackle the college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place those bets. Right now, Gonzaga folks, 19.5-point favorites over Davidson. If you don't love that, if you're like, I'm not quite convinced on that, the over-under for this game is 154.5. I'm telling you right now, I'm smashing the over on that one personally. If you want to join me, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. Moving away from Gonzaga's win over Indiana to talk about the 5th place game taking place tonight, Friday evening, 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. The game will be on ESPN2, and it will be Gonzaga taking on the mighty Steph Curry's, the Wildcats of Davidson. We thought Bulldogs versus Wildcats would be Gonzaga's final game of the battle for Atlantis. Didn't quite happen the way we thought that it would, in a different game and against a different Wildcats team, but that is still the case. Davidson beat Providence on Thanksgiving. 69-58 was the final score there. That sent Providence into the 7th, 8th place game against Indiana, which I will report now. There's 2 minutes left as I'm recording, but Indiana is up very big. I think they will win this one. Providence will finish last in this event, and that's kind of why I think I'd rather face Davidson. I watched the first 30, 40 minutes of this game. Davidson crushed them. They were up 38-18 at halftime against the Friars. 38-18. It was a 16 to 20 point lead for the majority of the game. Really, the first entire half, Davidson jumped out to an early lead and maintained it for the majority of the half. Providence chipped away in the second half, eventually got it a little bit closer, but this thing was never in question. Davidson pretty much dominated throughout. Bobby Durkin had 20 points for the Wildcats on 4 of 8 shooting from 3. Connor Kachera had 22 points, 5 rebounds. He was 7 of 10 from the field and 8 of 11 from the free throw line. Let's meet this Wildcats team, the fighting Steph Curry's. Gonzaga has not faced Davidson since the infamous 2008 NCAA tournament, where Steph Curry and Stephen Gray traded off making three-pointers all game long, but Davidson ultimately ended up upsetting Gonzaga in that tournament. Wildcats 5-1 on the season, were projected to not finish well in the Atlantic 10 Conference, but they're off to a strong start this year. Coach Matt McKillop replaced his father, Bob McKillop, who was the head coach there for close to 40 years. Matt is in his 3rd season. They have not finished higher than, I think, 11th in the A10, but they are looking good this year. 5-1 on the year, wins over Providence, of course, as we talked about. Also East Tennessee State, Bowling Green, VMI, and a non-D1 opponent. From a KenPom perspective, Providence 87th, East Tennessee State 128th, Bowling Green 277, VMI 341, and then, of course, the non-D1 opponent. Davidson's 1 losses to Arizona in the first round of the Battle for Atlantis. They lost that one 104-71, which is definitely a blowout. Let's not pretend it's not a blowout, but this game was a little closer for a while in the first half. Davidson was hanging tough. Arizona just blasted them in the second half. Wouldn't be surprised if we see a fairly similar game tonight for Gonzaga taking this team on. Right now, Davidson is 111th at KenPom. Their adjusted offensive efficiency is 77th. However, their defensive efficiency is way down at 176th. Not a great defensive team, which made Providence scoring 18 first half points all the more shocking in that game on Thanksgiving. Tempo-wise, Davidson is not a fast-paced team, 201st in that category at KenPom. Going to talk about our keys to a Gonzaga victory in this game on Friday evening. Key number 1, you got to keep Bobby Durkin off the three-point line. This dude is really, really good. He's one of the best three-point shooters in the entire country. 54.3% so far this season. 6 games is obviously not a big sample size, but he's taking 7 three-pointers a game. That's a pretty good sample size. 7 three-point attempts per game, and he's making them 54% of the time. This dude is lights out from deep. The team's shooting 34% from 3. So Durkin is carrying this team. I didn't do the math, but non-Bobby Durkin three-point shooters for Davidson must be 31, 32%, maybe even 30% from 3 because of the volume that he is shooting. This is not a good three-point shooting team, but they have one very good three-point shooting player. They really have two. Mike Lunani is 46.5% on 2.5 3-point attempts per game. He comes off the bench. He's not a huge player for them, but they have two guys who can really light it up. But Durkin is the player. You got to find a way, whether it's basically playing a box and one and just have, whether it's Khalif Battle or somebody like that, just in his grill all game long. I don't know what it is. Be willing to let him put the ball on the deck and drive to the basket. But if you give him open looks from three, he will knock them down. Key number two is the flip side of that. You got to shoot it well from beyond the arc. Davidson is giving up. Opponents are shooting 41% from three against Davidson this year. This is not a good perimeter defensive team. Providence isn't a great three-point shooting team, which is why they struggled, although they looked better in that area in the second half. But for Gonzaga, you got to shoot it well from beyond the arc, especially if you struggle with key number one and Bobby Durkin is keeping them in this game because he's knocking down three-point shots. Would be great to see Khalif Battle get going from beyond the arc. Would be great to see Dusty Stromer, who's over 40% on the season but hasn't played well in Atlantis. Would be nice to see him see some shots go down. Would be nice to continue to see the power forwards after Gregg made a three last night, after Michael Ajayi has been a solid three-point shooter. Would be great to see those guys start knocking him down as well. That is a big area for Gonzaga. Nolan Hickman's been great. We've seen some of the other players be inconsistent, but at times very effective from three. Would be a nice game where the whole team puts it together. They shoot 38+% from three and really put Davidson in a tough spot in a hole early because of the outside shooting. Key number three, you got to win the battle on the boards. Davidson's not a good offensive rebounding team. They're 279th in the country right now in offensive rebounds per game. Don't give them any second chance opportunities. Gobble up boards on the defensive glass. Get out in transition if you can. I suspect, based on Davidson's tempo and their poor offensive rebounding, that they are going to fly back defensively and not even really attempt to get offensive rebounds. That might prevent Gonzaga from getting out in transition as much as they'd like, but does not allow, it puts Davidson in a spot where they can't get a lot of offensive boards, and you got to prevent them from doing so when they attempt to. And of course, same thing on the other end of the floor. Get your second chance opportunities when you can. Davidson's a better defensive rebounding team. They don't have a ton of size, so get some offensive boards, get second chance opportunities, force Davidson into having to be as good as they can on the glass in order to win this basketball game. Speaking of size, for Gonzaga, key number 4, paint touches and getting to the free throw line. Reed Bailey is 6'11", 210 pounds. Sean Logan is their backup center. He's 6'10", 205 pounds. Two 6'10" guys on this roster, so they got a little bit of size for a smaller school, but both these guys are skinny. Neither of these guys are bangers down low. That's not how they play. Sean Logan is a foul machine. He averages 7.6 fouls per 40 minutes. He struggles to stay on the floor because of foul issues. Reed Bailey is much better at not committing fouls, but that's because he doesn't really contest a lot of shots around the rim. He's 6'11". He is the biggest player on Davidson's roster. He has 2 blocks in 6 games this season. That's it. Not a shot blocker, not a rim protector. Get Graham Ike paint touches on the block. Get Braden Huff paint touches on the block. Let him go to work. Have both these guys have strong performances coming out of Atlantis to get ready for that game against Kentucky coming up next week. If they double, get those shooters open. Go back to key number 2, shoot it well from beyond the arc. I think Davidson probably will double because it was effective against Graham Ike, and they saw that tape and they know that they can try to do that. So for Gonzaga, if they're doubling, get the ball out, swing it around, get an open look from 3. Key number 5, get some bench players some run, get them some confidence. Stromer in particular, we said we're going to talk about it to come out. He has not played well in the last couple of games. Nothing would be better than to get your young sophomore wing who started out the season strong, who's fading a little bit right now. Get him some confidence coming out of this tournament. Get him a game where he has 8 points, knocks down a couple threes, has some defensive plays, gets a transition dunk, something like that. Get Dusty Stromer in a position where he has an effective game. Would be nice to see Braden Huff bounce back too. He had 5 points in Gonzaga's win over Indiana. I'm not worried about Braden Huff. He's been fantastic all year long and has one not great offensive night. It's not a concern. Doesn't mean it wouldn't be nice to see him bounce back from that a day later and play well against a good Davidson team. And then ideally you get to see Emmanuel Innocente. You get to see some of Ismaila Diani. You get to see some of Jun Suk Yo in this game as well. We haven't seen those guys. We've seen Innocente a little bit. We haven't seen Diani or Yo. Would be nice to, A, be in a position where those guys can play as in up big in the second half, so you can put those guys in the game. But also, it'd be nice to get the other players some rest in a situation where they're playing their third game in 3 days. They've traveled across or like not outside of the country. It would be nice to be able to get those guys a little bit of a break here in that final game. Last thing I'll say here before we move on, I know Providence is higher at KenPom, even after they just got waxed by Indiana. I know Davidson was kind of viewed as the worst team to potentially match up against. I know there are some fans who are concerned about Gonzaga's non-conference strength of schedule, with UConn doing what they did in Maui, with Baylor not looking very good, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I'll just say this. I honestly think this might be a lukewarm take, especially now after that Indiana game. I would not be surprised at all if Davidson finishes higher in the net, higher in the KenPom than Providence. Wouldn't surprise me at all. I watched that game. Davidson looked like the better team every minute of the game that I watched. So I think this is a better matchup for Gonzaga, and I think that will bear out as the season goes on. So I'm not concerned about that. I think this is a better game for Gonzaga, a better opponent. It's going to teach them more about themselves. It's going to get them more prepared for March. I'm glad Gonzaga is playing Davidson in this situation. Obviously, I wish there's a lot of things I would have changed about how this tournament went, and certainly would have rather been playing the other Wildcats team here, but I don't think Davidson is as bad of a draw as some people are likely going to make it out to be. Going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back on Monday with a recap of this game, talking about how the women's team is doing in the Paradise Jam, or did in the Paradise Jam. And then, of course, next week we'll start to get you ready for that big game on Saturday. Mark Few, Mark Pope, Gonzaga, Kentucky, Climate Pledge Arena. Going to be an absolute blast. Hang with us while we get you ready for that one. Thanks again for listening, folks. Have a fantastic holiday weekend. And as always, go Zags.